it's so interesting. Oh my gosh, this is like, I have like a light bulb that went off too, because the history of this violence started with the rise of agriculture.
That's right.
Which is just blows my mind now that we're like thinking about it in this way and we're talking about it. Because if we go back to like matrilineal and equitable societies, that we just write off as quote unquote not civilized, right? Like when you Google like humans, they're like, oh, civilization as we know it is only 6,000 years old. That's because we are writing history as if patriarchy was the beginning of civilization. And there were all of these civilizations that existed long before patriarchy, which when you like, I think there was this archaeologist, like one of the first like womb holding archaeologists, who went back and was like, hey, um like, I'm going to re-look at all this information because it's always done with this patriarchal white supremacist lens. So I want to relook at old Europe and what was going on. And what she found was that there were all of these goddess praising cultures. I mean, humans have been around for 200,000 years, right? And when we learn about history, we only learn about like civil, quote unquote, civilizations of like the past 6,500 years, where there were patriarchal power systems in place. And in the eugenics movement, you'll see archaeologists that actually have written in their documents that in order for society to be studied and considered a civilization, they must be patrilineal. They must be patriarchal. But before that, you know, you have systems and societies that are matrilineal, that are polyamorous, that, you know, the whole tribe takes care of the children, that it is matrilineal, that there is an equitable system that is way different than anything we could even imagine today, because we have been so indoctrinated with this system, this new patriarchal white supremacist ableist system that's like, this is quote unquote reality, when it's only been reality for a very short time of humanity. And we had these equitable societies in old Europe. And what actually happened during the rise of agriculture was the emphasis on the importance of the sun god, of sun, which is associated with the masculine energy, started to rise over time, right? And so what my theory is that it's like, you know, you have these societies that are very balanced with lunar energies, solar energies, and their own menstrual energies, and everything, and all these cycles. And then when agriculture starts to become more prominent in societies, and they start to see it as more valuable, and they start to see solar energy as the more quote unquote valuable energy than the lunar energy, then you start to get this imbalance, right? You have this imbalance where all of a sudden the sun gods, the masculine gods, start to take power or start to take precedence, and you actually have like sun cults that took over in old Europe and actually violently took over a lot of the old Europe and the Celts, which Celts actually spread across all of old Europe previously. And all the way as it gets like, as they gain more and more power, and you lead to places like Rome, where it's like the ultimate patriarchy, right? What was like founded on raping all of the women in that town and taking them as essentially slaves, as taking them as wife slaves, and actually increasing levels of infanticide, where they're actually killing off girl babies so that men would outnumber women and have the power, and we're keeping them at a young age and marrying them off at age 12, so that you're almost removing an entire side of an entire half of humanity's wisdom, right? And so, but they saw it as, you know, this value system, this new value system that they started to put in place, that we now know as the patriarchy, which is just assumed that it's like, it's always been like that, but it hasn't. It was, and it came with the rise of agriculture and that hyper production of us being able to control nature, right? Of us having our tools, you being able to use our tools and our structure and our masculine energy. It just kind of went in the hyper mode. So I think we might have had like the hyper feminine mode, and then we have this 6,500 years of this hyper masculine mode. And now we're in this new paradigm, right? That's birthing right now, where I feel like we're coming into like this genderless paradigm, where we're like, okay, can we find a way to be a lot more equal in our solar and lunar energies as humanity, and really honor both of them equally, because there's a violence that we need to heal from. Like it runs so deep, and we just don't talk about it. Like when we and this is why I love, identifying as a witch and talking about witchcraft, because we don't actually talk about the truth of how much harm has been caused to humanity by the witch burnings. If you Google witch burnings right now, or like witch trials, every single time Google will bring you to like, oh, Salem witch trials, when, maybe about 16 people were killed, and oh, because people back then were so dumb that they actually thought witchcraft existed. And it's like, no, witchcraft very much did exist. Like, it wasn't like magic wasn't just this fake thing. It was their spirituality. They were nature-based spirituality. And during the witch scares, like in old Europe, like it wasn't just like 16 people in Salem. No. In old Europe, they were like, the numbers are very conflicting, but it's like 9 to 12 million people that were murdered, killed, buried alive, burned at the stake. Daughters going against mothers, mothers against daughters. Nowhere was safe. There were entire towns where sometimes only one woman was left in the entire town because they had killed all the rest of them. And it was all to control the spirituality. And this, like, I don't know if I want to get all into Jesus and Mary Magdalene. I don't know if I'll go there, but like, there was a lot of spiritual power in womb holders because they're so connected to source directly through their womb. Like when you're literally pulling in souls from, the other side of, from the other side through your womb, you have that deep connection to source energy. And there's so much power and wisdom that comes with that. And so if you're going to take over and control the world spiritually and colonize the world using religion, you're going to have to kill and violently get rid of any of those womb holders that are connected to herbalism, are midwives, are doulas. All of them, they had to go, right? In order for the system to be able to colonize the world, they had to get rid of them. And we don't talk about this trauma. Like, we never talk about this in history. We talk a lot about other genocides and things that have happened, but we don't talk about the like mass femicide that happened and how it was directed at womb holders, at women. And we're like, oh, well, men were also killed in the witch burnings. It was like, well, it was anybody that practiced that nature-based spirituality, and anybody that was connected to these menstruality practices and had that wisdom. And I recently even learned that had that wisdom of herbal practices, of doula practices, midwifery, any of these things, menstrual practices, and menstruality as a spirituality. And I recently learned that like it wasn't even just the actual killing of them. But one example that I recently learned was that they had the German purity laws, which is why beer today is made mostly with hops, is because all of the household, like womb holders, women, witches, each town in Germany, like there were a lot of womb holders and women that had their own herbal remedies for things, and they would make beers with all different types of herbs. And the German purity laws were, in order to take away their power, they said you can only make beer with these 3 herbs. And all of a sudden you're taking away all the medicinal power of the womb holders who were still alive, who were escaped the witch burnings, taking away their power to do their herbal work. And it's just mind-blowing to me that we are born with this womb trauma. A lot of people call it the mother wound, but all of this womb trauma and this innate fear that keeps us from really stepping into and rebirthing these practices again and stepping into our power as leaders, because we have this like collective trauma that has never been fully healed.
Wow. I there's so much to talk about here. You really offered a beautiful and poignant map of human consciousness evolution, talking about agriculture into the period of witch burning, and the rise of the Industrial Revolution. These are like 2 key big macro consciousness evolution moments of shifting to patriarchal agricultural society, and then the second one of switching to industrial society. These are, I think, both worthy of a lot of examination by everyone listening to this. And the other, one piece I wanted to add to the second part of this, the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment, is that not only were witches and women and all the natural religions targeted, but also the mainstream religions that we're familiar with now are also shaped during those times, where Gnostic Christianity, other types of Christianity, of Judaism. I read a book called Magic of the Ordinary, which talks about how 300 years ago, Judaism was, which is my background, was much more witchy, was much more earth-based, had four directions in it, was more of a matrilineal culture than it is now. It can be very patriarchal in how it's applied now and how it's lived. And that happened around the same time the witches were being burned, that Jews were also invited to purge the feminine and purge the spiritual from their tradition, which is like a birthright I've lost, of not being connected to the magic of that Judaism used to hold, and the spiritual component was restricted. And so many other examples of this. It was the Roma too, and like we just think of the genocide moments, but that was also a massive cultural shift of not having those the witches in the society, not having the herbalists. Like you talk to people now, we would lead workshops in our nature business of having people. One of them was around, what are you inheriting in terms of natural remedies and herbalism thing? Like what are your family, what's passed down to you? And it's so limited now what we get, what people were writing. I got from my family of what plants I know how to use, what my connection is to magic, or to not even just magic, of just pure simple. There's free medicine right out there. If you know 10 plants, you can go and heal like injuries and wounds without spending any money. And like it's wild that it's taken from us. So you named so many things. And I just also, one last piece of this is that I also want to come back to how you're guiding people here as we come to close, that the book by Frederick Laloux, Reinventing Organizations, he looks at where are organizations. He gives his own, I think you would probably want to make your own version of this, but he makes a version of where are organizations on the evolution of human consciousness, of where is your organization, like which part of this trajectory is it on? Is it one of these hyper masculine militant kind of organizations is early on, or like one of the second ones? Is it tribal? Is it, and eventually where its progression takes us is to an organic system that can heal itself, where every member of an organization can be aware of the greater natural whole and be improving its health and its vitality. And so I just think about that as you talk about guiding humans and organizations, of helping humans identify where are they on this evolutionary trajectory, and where are we. And like what you really helped me with, why this came up for me, is you're talking about really getting the wisdom of cycles, is getting back to the highest wisdom of nature. Is really
yes. Oh, I want to quote you on that. Yes.